Very keen to be here today to celebrate the 10th anniversary. I remember the early discussions Phelim and I had about the concept and whether it was a bit pushing it to call it the first annual one, but hey, he went with it and was proved right. I think it's been a really interesting series of conferences over the years. It's that blend of the operational elements, the technical elements, allowing discussion, not always agreement, and I think that's actually quite healthy. But we very much encourage the audience to come in with questions and ask the panellists. We have a question and answer format you'll see throughout the day, but there's always the opportunity for you in the audience to ask a question, so don't be hesitant about that. I think one of the points I really wanted to make is to actually celebrate Phelim's performance with CTG Intelligence over the years, the series of niche conferences that he's built up internationally and swiveled during lockdown quite seamlessly online and has kept that up with part of it. But also the regular attendees that we see here, but also the new people who've come along. There's a lot to learn. The networking is very important. You'll meet new people, you'll see old friends, sometimes people you may not like that much, but hey, we'll keep that in the margins. And, you know, I have to reference Alex Bomberg here because there's a lot less of him these days, so. But, you know, on a serious note, this is a serious conference. There's a lot to take from it. So pin your ears back. Don't accept everything without question. You know, do ask questions. Do embrace discussion. And I think we'll move on, and that's enough from me. And we'll call the first panel up. So thank you. Right, the first panel discussion, understanding the full scope of corporate security modernisation. What is an executive today? So this is Leigh Harper, Security Associate Director from Cundall, Dawn Holmes, Chuck Tobin, the President of the International Protective Security Board, Darren Carter, Group Director, Security, Safety and Sustainability, Edwardian Hotels, and Jacquie Davis, who's my Operations Director at Optimal Risk. If you'd all like to come forward, and this session is going to be moderated by Phelim.
We also have some seats near the front if you would like. You're very, very welcome. Well, thank you very much, Mike, and thank you to everyone for being here in such great numbers as the early birds. The early birds are important, as is the early bird panel, because it sets the tone for the day. We are a conference, so we would endeavour to have an outcome. Maybe we don't yet have a document, but we want an outcome. We want practical ideas. We have a variety of topics today, and some are strategic, some are technical, but we want something practical at the end of it. So we need to start off by framing the event. Of course, we are still interested in technology and modernisation, but what if we, you know, if we jumped right into something really specific, you'd probably say, wow, it's too early. However, if we start with the question of who or what we're protecting, I think that's a good place to start. So our panel seeks to look at, I suppose, what is an executive and why other things are not an executive. And on our panel, we have quite an interesting cast of corporate security and EP. I guess let's start off with a fundamental. Why do we know who we protect, and what is the key process around key personnel identification? Okay, starter for 10, nice and easy, I suppose. Dawn, we've got a roaming mic. What are your thoughts? Why do we protect who we protect? What's the process?
I think this has changed a lot. Back in the day, it would be very much C-suite, exec, we would understand that. It was very simple. I think what we need to do now is be way more ingrained within the organisation and the business, understand the risk the appetite. So it's changing. So there's not really a one size fits all. It's understanding your organisation, getting embedded and reviewing the risk and the intelligence that is gathered around your organisation and making good decisions. Back in the day, the one size fits all, you're protecting X amount of people and they will be a target, they're out there, is completely different. Now you're potentially protecting thousands of people who have data and IP.
That's a great observation. And so what, if we come to Darren, what about an organisation that has internal and external people that potentially need protection? How do you identify key personnel?
Oh, well, I guess it's not easy, but I think traditionally, if we look at what is an executive in today's context, it's a person that holds the value of the business, I guess. This is your figureheads, your chiefs. But as we've moved on recent years, we've seen that actually they don't necessarily hold the company's vital assets. The value Dawn speaks of in IP. But it's also those, in a contextual format, it's on any given day that changes. I mean, it fluctuates, doesn't it? I mean, where is that person operating? What are they operating? Where are they going to? If you talk about scientific research and exploratory areas for, oil and gas companies going into exploration, then that person becomes vitally important. So, I mean, you have to fully understand your operations, I guess, and understand where your real risks sit, not just because it's a figurehead, it's a perceived value holder. So, I mean, it's a constant program of threat analysis, really.
Okay, and that's great, especially with your hotel background. Chuck, what about for you, from a third-party perspective? Is it literally who has commissioned your work? Is it as simple as that, or has it evolved?
Well, I think it definitely needs to consider, one, the scope of what you're offering to the executive. What we hear a lot of discussion is everybody's getting executive security, but perhaps they're getting support related to traveler security, and you have an obligation to support certain travelers. I think we need to be able to draw that distinction between travel security responsibilities for people who are sending into Iraq or sending into somewhere in austere environments versus those that are receiving perhaps a full suite of executive protection services. And that might include then more of the digital executive protection and the home risk assessments and all the things that are done to maybe be a more holistic model. So I think to get to that point, though, you have to be able to understand what key personnel identification looks like, not just because they have a negative impact on shareholder value in a public company, but also what's the effect to the internal brand, right? You have a key person who really is essential to the organization emotionally, or you have somebody who has a key relationship to, a company in India who's maybe one of your big distributors. So you really have to dial down, and then based on that key personnel identification program, start to tier what appropriate investment looks like based on the types of executives, so to speak, that you have.
And just because I'm talking to you, Chuck, do you get an opportunity to push back? Is it dangerous? Someone says, I want you to protect X, Y, and Z, but you can actually say, well, one of those is not valuable, but something you haven't considered is valuable.
Absolutely. So I mean, in my paying job, not the IPSB, my paying job at risk, we do those risk assessments for clients all the time, and that it's critical, I think, with any program to have that stakeholder conversation. And it's not just speaking with the CEO, it's speaking with general counsel, speaking with the human resources office, the investor relations, right? All the people that have some sense of what value means to their staffing.
Okay, I like that, and that hopefully resonates with our audience because people are looking to make collaborative, ventures. Leigh, is there something policy-wise or legal-wise, or maybe even things that you get told from HR? These are key personnel, and these are not, or is it more complex?
I think that's an interesting question. From a legal perspective, I wouldn't like to say. I think it's very difficult when you're talking about protecting people. Being able to identify one person is more important as another to another, which I think is kind of partly what everybody's saying here. Like when we're protecting a life, that's a very different sort of element to protecting something in a business, I guess, that operationally might have a big impact if they were to be lost, whether that be reputationally, operationally. I have typically seen, in my experience and from a consultancy's perspective working across many sectors, HR typically don't get involved, which is quite strange, really, actually, you raising that. they're not often one of the stakeholders that are involved in that process. And I think a lot of it has just come down to historically, we've always protected a certain group of people, as opposed to taking that risk-based approach and understanding what value do those individuals hold in terms of operational to the business. Because there are certain individuals that or teams, it might not be one person, a team, that if there were to be an impact to those, you wouldn't be able to operate your business, and it would have huge financial, reputational implications. But I think that's a really interesting point about HR and legal, because I honestly don't often see that being a consideration.
Well, hopefully we can talk to our HR colleagues without fear. I like to joke about HR, but Jacquie, what other processes could we embark on for key personnel identification? Could we come up with very, very new categories that people have never heard about, or do you think that would get pushback?
I'm going to be honest with you here. It's who is the cash cow, really. So that can be the chief executive within a corporation. But then if you look just outside corporations and you look at individuals who have to be protected, which is an executive in their own right, they're the cash cow. So it's who's bringing in the most money that has to be protected. But also what we've found very much recently is protecting the families of those personnel. That has become really important recently, that obviously, the homes, the RST, but also protecting their children, the wives. Because when you have somebody that becomes well known in a company, and they're well known in the media, then obviously the family also becomes at risk. So it's not just corporate. There is a lot outside corporate that has to be looked after as well.
And I like that you brought up the family, because it kind of it's the elephant in the room. It's what are you protecting them from? Not maybe K&R, but extortion certainly. So maybe let's start with you, Jacquie, and let's come back this way this time. Why not someone like a systems administrator in an organisation? I like to hone in on that, because they have the keys to all the data. They have the keys to the kingdom. Shouldn't we be watching out for their children as opposed to the CEO? Because someone picks up their children instead of the correct person. Now you have influence.
I think when the risk evaluations are done, funnily enough, you say about that, he is a key personnel, the data person, but they get overlooked. They're the poor guy that's in the room with the computers that nobody talks to, and they might see him, at the water butt once a day. He's not considered because he's there doing everything in the background. He's not up front. So therefore, when you're going to do the threat and risk vulnerability and evaluations on that, is he even considered?
So, Leigh, let's run with that then. Is he considered? Is it about replicability or replaceability rather than seniority?
I think historically it's about seniority, right? That's ultimately what it comes down to, high-profile individuals that perhaps are more well-known publicly, if targeted, would have a bit more of a reputational impact as opposed to financial or operational. I guess if we had to protect the entire business and every employee in it that held a key role, it just wouldn't be possible, which is where other policies like travel policies, social media use, that kind of awareness of staff of how to keep themselves safe, how to keep the data that they use safe, it all come into play to kind of form part of that protection for the business. But I guess in reality, you wouldn't be able to protect all of those individuals that potentially do have a greater impact, actually, if something were to happen, or they're more likely to be targeted in the sense of getting hold of commercial data, for example. It's also interesting because I think if you think about something like a law firm, and depending on what the clientele they've got, for example, that kind of changes all the time. So they might be dealing with a particular case that is incredibly high profile, and all of a sudden that legal team become particularly high profile in the media, targeted because they're slightly easier to get to than perhaps the person that they're representing, for example. So I think it's such a difficult conversation about why we're protecting and who we're protecting. And seniority, I think, unfortunately, is probably the key factor.
I guess seniority comes with budget often. What do you think, Chuck? Because in the cyber world, they don't talk about executive protection. They talk about BDR, backup and disaster recovery. What's the backup and disaster recovery version in EP?
Well, before I get to the backup discovery portion of EP, I think there's a lot of interesting points that you hear, that it is really a complex matrix that goes into determining that key person, right? To Jackie's point, often it's the high net worth earner, but you also have, where do they come from, right? If I have somebody who's a former admiral or a prime minister who has now joined our organization, but maybe isn't the CEO, but has a critical impact on the organization because of what they carry, all that lifestyle factors and all that has to go into determination as to the value they offer. And I think that when you start thinking about that, from the HR engagement perspective, one of the first questions I would want to ask them is this position replaceable? And quite often, they'll come to me and say, yeah, our chief technology officer is critical to our business, but I can hire another one tomorrow, right? If I am working for a tech company and my leader or leaders are visionaries in the industry, the impact is catastrophic. Whereas if I have an organization, an oil refinery or something that has a CTO, no offense, not to be callous to that poor individual, there's still an obligation, right, at the corporate level to say we need to determine what level of investment's appropriate based on this person at the top of the suite to this person at the bottom of the suite, and maybe I'm doing my digital scrubbing and things for PII for those lower level people. But I'm not necessarily, to Jackie's point, doing the threat vulnerability risk assessment at home. I'm not reaching out to find out where the kids are commonly exposed. But that's part of that matrix we have to figure out with the help of stakeholders.
So building on it then, maybe Darren, do you think then it's not about replaceability but succession planning? I don't want to load it for you, Darren, sorry, but what...
Well, you always do, Phelim, so carry on. Sorry.
What does backup and disaster recovery look like in this context, but, physical protection?
Well, I guess the pure BDR is probably more qualified, Dawn, to talk about that. But I think, when we're looking at, what is the alternative value, or where is the risk seen, and where are we looking outside of the, the figureheads? It absolutely is the case that if you are hell bent on protecting, providing a team of people to protect the classic chiefs of a business, and you've missed. Look, if there's not a program of cyber resilience around the company, for example, you are exposed way beyond any measure than you would be, had you had a bit more maturity. So services go into a company where they're providing executive protection. I guess some people in this room would have moved their business through providing a much more extensive and broad-based threat analysis of where that business risk sits, and they probably have extended services into that business that affect the chief technology officer, that impact how the business operate, how exposed are their people. I mean, what vulnerabilities are they presenting to the business that expose them way beyond the risk of somebody being, assassinated on the street, as we've seen, right? So ultimately, you're protecting the business. They just happen to be figureheads or key players in the business. So if that's not a rounded scenario whereby you've holistically looked at where the real risks, what can cause the most damage, and as we well know, it's probably way off the pavements of a street now. It's it's in our pockets. We're all doomed if we switch a device on these days, right? So you have to look much more broadly around a pure CP protective services into a business. If that's what you're doing, then you need to extend the maturity of that program. I think is where the real richness sits, I think.
I like that because that talks to the digital bodyguard, and I think there are people out there that actually use that as an offering, the cyber bodyguard. Anyway, we'll get onto that on a later panel. Dawn, BCDR, replicability. You've got experience in some very interesting organisations. What do you think?
I think It's to the point from Darren and Chuck about the profile and the figureheads and the information out there is really important, and it's difficult because it's not quite tangible. It's not a job title. It's not kind of a certain location, and I think a lot of it is it's doing your homework, having the intelligence, kind of having teams that are trawling through from an OSINT perspective, looking at what social media is saying about certain figureheads. That groundwork and foundation is really important to be able to do anything from a protective or business continuity and recovery perspective. And it's very, very difficult to achieve and do well. But I think that, going to your digital kind of, bodyguard, it's essential information to understand what the risk levels are, because it's changed so much. And going back to kind of what Jacquie said about the families, they're a softer target that possibly kind of don't quite understand what they need to do to protect themselves and the family, or what dad or mum does. And, people will target those softer elements, so it's having kind of an education campaign for these people who are likely to become targets. So it's a robust understanding that the approaches, the social engineering that could occur, managing social media for the family, and kind of being aware of that, are all the foundations which will allow you to plan how you kind of, recover and protect.
And deploy your resources. So you actually build a business case. Well, Dawn, let's start with you and let's go back that way. We've been doing this 10 years, and I happen to remember that the first year there was apprehension when we talked technology and EP, because some people on the panel that time said, but I cannot now become a technologist. Do you think that 10 years on, that those fears are irrelevant, because there are so many tools that allow the uninitiated, or maybe the non-technical, to get stuck in? Tools that give you OSINT, tools that give you whatever you need to make the justification as to who the executive is.
I think it's much easier. I would certainly kind of recommend reaching out to consultants who can show you exactly where to look for. You'll never find everything as a small organisation, and unless you've got hundreds of people scouring intelligence 24/7, but you can certainly make your life easier. You can make your choices more valid and deliberate. So I think if you're not utilising the intelligence and the information out there, you are making your life very, very difficult. And there are, as you say, there are tools there which you can kind of work out for yourself, but there's advice as to the routes to go down.
I like that, yeah, because then you don't have to be afraid. You can utilize it. But Darren, if I'm in a corporation, I kind of understand who and what is in the corporation. If I'm in a third-party environment where I might have different people every day, like a hotel, how do I use such a tool? Because I could just, in my own imagination, imagine guest A arrives today. There's a lot on social media about guest A, but guest A will be gone tomorrow. How do I balance that?
Yeah, it's not simple, actually. If you want to do it correctly, every day in hospitality, I guess, in an event space where you're providing bars, restaurants, spas, theatres, event spaces, so you're doing a whole plethora of different things, and your risk profile changes daily and several times throughout the day, actually. So you have to have some kind of understanding of aggregate risk. So I'm actually talking to an individual right now about how we use threat intelligence, not information intelligence, because I need it to come to me developed. I don't need to know information because that doesn't help me at all. I need to understand how that impacts that day. So it is very difficult, and it's not, as Dawn says, there is a plethora of different avenues that you can gain information from most of the time, but it's not developed intelligence. It doesn't come packaged in the way that you can actually use that and deploy your resources to actually mitigate, because you have to spend so much effort in understanding and trying to develop that yourself, and you don't have the time to do that. You've got in that environment that I sit in every day, I shouldn't actually be here right now because there's things going on somewhere in reality, but I am. But you just have to understand that, risk sits there, but you just have to be comfortable there. But the more comfortable we can become, or not comfortable, the more we can trust what we are being given, and that you understand it. That's the other thing. You need to be able to understand it actually yourself. But, how you interpret risk on a daily basis, obviously you can't just be deploying resources, switching them on and off. You have to have this kind of aggregate understanding and a playbook that you've got confidence in that works. But yeah, it's not an easy space to actually operate in when you've got multiple types of things going on at any one time.
And I think we'll all appreciate that it has to be actionable. I like that. And in fact, we've had previous panels where we said intelligence is actionable, otherwise it's just information, or there's some kind of phraseology there. But Chuck, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a critique of some of the platforms that served up intel or info said that it was not proactive enough, and you might have to employ a team of people yourself now to use the tool. Do you think we're still in that ecosystem, or is it getting more helpful?
I think the market is still struggling with how to engage in that space. We know, I think, as advisors that you have to think beyond just the intrusive pieces of protection, right? The drivers and the agents. You have to deal with the more discrete aspects of protective intelligence and InfoSec and even the cyber side of things. But the level of investment that I see across corporations in protective intelligence programs or digital EP is not where it should be based on the level of risk that's posed. And I think United Healthcare is a perfect example of that, where so much of his behavior could have been easily monitored, predictable, et cetera. I can tell you the number of, I'm sure a lot of people in the room had the same scenario where your level of consulting with the market has gone up drastically since December 4th. And the number of them that suddenly have this realization that maybe they should scrub their leaders' participation in public events. Whereas before they would brand the building, brand the hotel full of everything that they're going to be here. Now they're starting to think more and more about how do they have to go back to the things that we've always talked about on the InfoSec side. But for the market, I still think there's a lack of embracing that notion of that cyber and digital space. Part of it is, I think, on the people that are selling the business, us in the room, in that we're comfortable selling the things we are very, very confident in. Maybe not so much selling the notion that your CEO should have engagement from the tech side of the company to put in an infrastructure in his house, because that's not where my expertise is. But we need to be able to work within that realm to say these are all the domains that are creating risks, so therefore we need to get them to engage in this.
And I like that feels confident, whereas maybe 10 years ago everyone was thinking, oh, do I now need to have to code? And then they realized no, coding is not part of cyber really, and it might be, but it's not. And it's much more fluidic, and I like the confidence now. Maybe people in the audience are not so confident, but I feel that you're more confident than maybe 10 years ago, which is a plus, or it has to be. So Leigh, when using these tools, do you think that there's a way to use the tools not only to identify who should be protected, but to communicate that with facts, figures, charts? I mean, there are some very snazzy charts that these tools produce. But are they effective at communicating that to the board?
In short, no, I don't think they probably are. I think that comes down to the person that's taking that data and information and interpreting it specific to their business, and I think that's important. You're getting the same information, but it may mean something completely different from one organisation to another. So I think there's still that requirement to have skilled individuals that can interpret and take that information and look at what that means to their business and the people within their business. And I think that's very difficult. I've seen some tools that have attempted to do that, but I think it's very subjective and it differs. There's no one size fits all. So you may be able to take a kind of an example of that and say, okay, if that was the case here, how would that work? But I think ultimately it still needs that interpretation of that data and the skilled individual or team to be able to put that together in a way that your organisation would understand.
which I think is a plus given the on-march of the promise of AI. You still have to put your own slant on it. And maybe, audience, you will be pleased to hear, and you might already know, that the InfoSec community struggles with a similar thing. They bemoan tools that use games designers over actual utility. They also bemoan receiving alerts about Cozy Bear exploits. What am I to do with that? I need a run book, I need a playbook, I need something actionable. So you might already be aware, but otherwise it's a good thing to know. Jacquie, do you think then that today we can embed this kind of discussion, but also think about, you know, other scenarios, like where different VIPs are constantly at a different level? Because we've got an events panel coming up too, and I think that's an interesting dynamic.
Okay, so first of all, let me say I was one of the Luddites on that panel 10 years ago. Okay, I haven't changed, I'm still a Luddite. The difference is now, we have an intelligence division which I rely on heavily, both for CP and surveillance, because they are able to give you real-time, up-to-date intelligence, especially with a GSOC. Now, if we take last week, the Bitcoin guy that was kidnapped in France with his family, his wife and children were kidnapped as well. He had left the company 4 years previously. So whoever did the kidnapping and put the ransom into the company hadn't realised, so their intelligence was pretty awful, of the kidnappers, because they hadn't realised he'd left the company 4 years beforehand. Yes, he was still a Bitcoin billionaire, but so the company weren't responsible, and hence how he a ransom was paid and he was rescued. Let's put it that way. So I think it's important to understand from an intelligence point of view, yes, we need intelligence and we need on-the-ground intelligence now, but it's got to be real and it's got to be relevant. And we have to ignore all the sound that's going on in the background around the person we're protecting at the time. But we also have to be aware that the bad guys also have access to intelligence, and it's trying to monitor where they are and where we are. You know, if we can stay 2 steps ahead, if we can, 2 steps ahead of them, then obviously our intelligence is there. But it is very, very difficult. But now I can honestly say that without our intelligence director and everything he gives us, it would be a nightmare for us, really.
Which I think is going to chime with the audience, because I know many in the audience have set up protective intelligence divisions in the last few years. You know, some people were inspired by COVID because, you know, it was a good move. But it's good to hear that protective intelligence is key. We attended, many of us, the IPSB Protective Intelligence Symposium just last year, which was fantastic. Leigh, let me come back to you then. Today we have a lot of topics. In a way, we don't have any outrageous topics. You know, one year we sort of suggested everyone needed a drone license, and maybe that's not come to pass. We are sort of coming back to basics this year in some ways, but are we, strictly speaking, talking about the modernization or maturity of corporate security? Is that a theme, or is there not much substance to the question of modernization? Because I wonder, should we inject that question into every panel?
I think the word modernisation is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think if you're a business, you know, you should evolve and, you know, mature as a business and learn from, you know, mistakes or the information you've got and what's going on in the industry in your sector. And if you're not growing in that way, then you're going to stagnate very quickly and mistakes are going to be made. And you know, the whole element of risk assessment and understanding where you're vulnerable is pointless if nothing's going to move with it. So I think good businesses and good practices to always evolve. Modernisation, I think, has got so many connotations. Modernisation, there's always going to be new technologies, things like AI, that, you know, all of this, that I guess we could say that as modernising, but it's not necessarily something that is every business needs to move at the same pace. It's such a weird. I think maturing is probably. I think we had this discussion before. Chuck was saying that maturing is probably the right word. Evolving, ensuring that you are moving, not necessarily utilising every bit of technology or being seen to be doing what the next company's doing or what's new in the industry, but doing what's right for your business based on your needs, your experience, but utilising what's out there to help you to do that.
And Leigh, just out of interest, even for just me, what type of verbiage or terminology is your corporation sort of asking for? Are they saying, Leigh, modernise? Are they saying we want a mature what are they asking for the verbiage?
I'd say mature or evolve is probably more of a terminology than modernisation. I think, that's mature and evolve. Progression, another one, but modernisation, not something that typically is used as a wording.
No, I ask
corporate.
because I run the modernisation series, and I'm thinking about maybe changing the name. So, Chuck, building on perhaps some of the discussions that you had and we had at the Protective Intelligence Symposium, where do you see maturity being injected into the debate today?
I think it's kind of funny when especially the question you were just asking a second ago is what are they asking for, and I think quite often they don't know what they want, and in a general state they want best in class, but they don't know what best in class is. So that's where I think our conversation around maturity comes into place, and you think about whether or not the executive protection operation operates in an ad hoc state or an optimized state, and we want to make sure that we're moving closer to the optimized state. And I think this goes back to the earlier comments about, gathering metrics and reporting to the board. But I can tell you that most EP programs don't get a second of reporting to the board of directors. Your technology officers might, because there's an obligation perhaps to report about the state of cybersecurity, but most EP programs aren't adequately probably reporting to the board about their affairs, which I think then leads that gap in understanding of what am I trying to get to. If you try and maybe look at the enterprise security risk management model as a framework across a broad enterprise and narrow that scope down to the protection of key personnel in the executive protection program, I think then you start to figure out how do we begin to mature this program so that it aligns with the mission and vision of the organization, it's aligned with their risk statements to shareholders, it's then able to communicate how we are showing a benefit to the overall investment of shareholders.
And because I know you wear a couple of hats, how would that differ if we're talking ultra high net worth or family office? Do they simply say good, no incidents, or do they like different mechanisms and reporting structures?
I mean, absolutely. So if we think about a high net worth family office, in many of the cases for the family offices we work with, they have additional investments, right? So it's not just that key individual, but it's also all the enterprises they have made. So they do think like a big corporation, but they don't necessarily behave the same in their expectations because there's a much greater focus on the family and the enterprise of the family, distinct from the enterprises they own. Now sometimes there's a lot of bleeding between the two, and the protective sphere is a little gray, but unlike a Fortune 100 corporation, the family office is much more interested in the principals and the needs of the principals, and they may not care, right? Or they won't care about shareholder value, right? They care about continuity of the family, generation after generation after generation. So you do have to change your dialogue, and that then of course changes what metrics you're gathering. They're maybe not as concerned about the perception of the program like you would see in a corporation. They're maybe more concerned about the attributes that it enhances privacy, or that it does things that makes the family more invisible to live their lives naturally. Be able to go grocery shopping and not have the media or paparazzi all over them.
So maybe more verbiage around facilitation.
Right.
And I like that, because some people will remember we have had a few family offices in, we have today as well, and some of them described it as a struggle to care about the specifics of EP, which is hard for them to come to a conference like this, but they did appreciate the outcome, they did appreciate the facilitation. What about for you, Darren? What do you think?
I think just going back a couple of steps, if we talk about what buzzwords or terminology is being used, is often stop spending money, or efficiency as we call it. I guess, yeah, I mean, it is, a maturity, modernation, it is maturity, becoming more, refined in how you operate. So, I mean, that does come with efficiency, I guess. So that indicates more specialist services around a more refined sort of programme. But back on the spending money piece, I think after that United Health incident, we held an identical conference in one of my hotels several days later, US based, all pretty much North American visitors coming in, so leading up to that, in the planning, probably 3 months out, as I do always, it's an annual event for us. It comes down to money, and we really don't want to spend the money on just event security. And we kind of negotiate. We arrive at a point where I'm comfortable with it, and where the guy in New York's comfortable with it, and we run with that. But actually, because this was literally 3 or 4 days after that event, obviously there's no knee-jerk reaction, but we felt there was going to be an absolute uplift in contact from people that were visiting us. Some people in this room may have actually attended it, but there wasn't actually. So we had CFOs, CEOs of all the big Fortune 100 companies there on a pretty rapid investment conference, and nothing changed, spookily. I mean, we made some adaptations and changes to how we dealt with kind of like peripheral things around the event space, but nothing changed. And that's often comes down to what people are willing to spend, actually. So when we talk about, and going back to HR, and how companies talk about their most valued assets, it's about investing in what your statements mean to people as well. So I guess if that's part of a progressive, modernising way about how we operate, that a company actually places some commitment to the statements they make about not just their figureheads, but their the actual value of people that are around there, then it starts at the top and rolls down, doesn't it, really? I guess that's it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if I can follow up on his comments there, we've had a lot of conversations with clients recently, to their investor relations team, who literally had an aha moment when they said, well, I never thought about that investor relations event where every other executive in the world shows up at a hotel to give their pitch for future investment, and really we've left all the security planning on the shoulders of the hotel and not thought about enhanced protection because of proximity to so many other key people. So I think that's again one of those opportunities to speak to maybe not the C-suite, but the people who have a vested interest in the C-suite, such as your investor relations teams or others, that are probably positioning your executives in places that are greater exposure that nobody's really thinking about, because it's not a speaking engagement, but it's an engagement that puts them in close proximity to risk.
Which is ultra relevant as more people come back to attend conferences. Obviously I like conferences. Dawn, what are your thoughts then? Because ultimately we want collaboration between corporations and third parties in a conference such as this. How do we know then that they're modern? How do they know that you're modern? Or are we not using that term? We're saying mature. Like, how do we know?
I think it's trust and it's engagement. I don't like modern either, but going to mature, or I certainly like optimised, and I think you like optimised too. That just suggests kind of, leading the way, efficient, looking at kind of, exploiting opportunities and things like that. And it's really sitting down, engaging and understanding, are you both on the same page? I've had lots of, people approach my corporate saying, can we work together? We provide X, Y, and Z. And sometimes they're very slow in demonstrating what they can actually do for you because it's secret. It's an openness, it's kind of them understanding my organisation's unique needs, having an agility and being able to kind of, develop and flex and change with, an organisation that does a ridiculous amount. So it's just really, it's that learning and there's no tick sheet for it really. It's just the relationship building. And I think to anyone approaching a big corporate, it's do your homework, understand how they work, understand the risks that they actually are encountering, and coming up with a game plan as to how you can be innovative and different and give something to that organisation that they might not have themselves.
And Dawn, are you impressed by third parties that say, I've got this tech? Is that a plus point? Is that a given? Do you want to see their tech run book? Do you want to see their tech suite?
So I'm a bit of a geek. So tech, I am interested in tech, but I'm interested in tech that works with humans, not tech for tech's sake. I want to see value, I want to see resilience, I want to see a well thought out process, as opposed to a shiny box that sounds exciting but actually will fall short. And I enjoy the conversations with that, oh, will it? And really pushing that tech. And when you have a third party that's like, yes, we've done this here and we've tried that there and we've pushed it to the max, and you know what, it won't do this, but it will do that. That's where I think we can work together because we're on, you know, a similar kind of page.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Darren, is it a similar story for you? You know, what are your expectations of the mature third party, or modern, or optimized?
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, everybody gets approached in a similar sense, probably on a much different level to Dawn, but I mean, I guess I would say probably just change the tack a little bit in that if, you know, working without an event space or you know, a team coming into hotels, I would suggest that, to Chuck's point around an investor conference about kind of things being left to the venue, I would kind of, it's kind of an express wish really that if you're operating in hotels, engage with the people that are running the security services in that venue, because you'll only need them when you most need them and you won't know who they are actually. That's often what happens. And I don't expect, a complete workbook of what their role is, but they need to have encountered who they're working with, and understand at least some basic elements about what, who else is there, for example, right? So, but those basic principles. So I'm kind of twisting that a little bit to my advantage, but it's always that. I would say that's it genuinely is a mutually beneficial way of working, that you just check in a different way.
Win-win. Chuck, how do you or someone in the third-party world demonstrate that you are optimized, modern, mature? Like, how does one show that?
Well, I think it's all the things we're talking about here. I mean, if you are in this space and you don't have a protective intelligence program, you can't even begin to have a conversation around technical surveillance countermeasures. You don't understand what digital EP and PII scrubbing is, then you're behind where the industry is going. So I think from a maturity state, those are some of the conversations I have with our partners. And if they don't have it, that's fine. We just know they have to lean on us to facilitate some of those aspects of the protection circle. But I think maturity goes a long ways depending on what type of services you're requiring also. I'm not necessarily going to expect that my partner in Central Africa has the same depth of understanding these aspects, because I need them to be really good in one thing, and that might be transportation in this case. So if they're still operating poorly maintained vehicles and they're not training their people, then that's a whole different conversation. And I know that within the EP space, we still struggle with what is a minimal training standard and continuing education, I think globally. If you tried to find a best practice for continuing education for security drivers, well, there really aren't many standards, if any true standards, except for looking at law enforcement and how often they have to retrain. So going to that level and figuring out what does a mature provider look like, maybe that's one of the places I have to start, is what are their continuing education requirements, and of course their performance requirements.
I like that, and hopefully if you're available, Chuck, we'll do the round table over lunch upstairs in the boardroom on training evolution. So plug for that. That's good. I'm looking forward to it. Leigh, where then does this leave our conference? What sort of takeaways do you think people should try and get at the end of the day? We're looking at the optimization of corporate security and executives, but where can we end up?
I think just before I come to that, I think just something that I'd like to add is we in consultancy, we're quite often designing master plans and developing buildings in the built environment. And what I find really interesting about events like today is the more the people that are designing those spaces can understand some of those operational elements and respond, obviously, not in detail, but the response plans and people not working in isolation, the better we can design out some vulnerabilities and design in some optimization that assists in those, because we'll be designing big master plans where we'll be told by an events team, or VIPs will come in this way. Great, but if there's 85 VIPs, and a few thousand people, and there's an incident, all of those VIPs are going to the same place. That's clearly not going to be manageable, and all of those individual teams are going to have their own plans that they've worked out themselves. And without that collaboration with the events spaces and teams, you're ultimately just one of 1,000 people that is going to get no different treatment and is not going to be able to get out because there's one way in and one way out, and it's not. So I think for us, it's when we're trying to design these spaces and things like hotels as well, it's really useful to collaborate with people like yourselves to kind of see, okay, what can we do in the built environment to help optimise some of the operational elements and capabilities that you would need to protect some individuals in those circumstances. Things like, there might be safe rooms that we develop in, or particular routes, that access and egress routes that we can develop to support. But quite often these designs will happen, the operational teams will come in at the very end. EP's never thought about in those environments, other than there'll be some VIPs somewhere at some point. And then actually a lot of what you want to do is not actually achievable. So I think a takeaway from this on modernisation, I think it is just about communication and collaboration and working and talking to each other, not just within your own circles, but outside of that, with consultants, with operators, with tech companies, third parties, whatever it is. Because the more we're educated and the more we understand about each other's elements in this industry, that only helps us to evolve and mature, right?
I like it. Exposing, security by design to EP, to LP, to all sorts of communities. That's what we're trying to do. So thank you, Leigh. Jacquie, where does this leave us? What can we hope to achieve at the end of today?
Well, hopefully we will have networked a little bit more. We'll all be talking to each other a little bit more. I always say that those of us that have been around a long time, and probably me the longest, we collaborate with each other. We're grown-ups. We talk to each other. It's not about one company trying to take another company on, trying to take business. That is a thing of the past as far as I'm concerned. I find that we all collaborate, we all talk, we all help each other. I know, we have clients and colleagues over in the US. We're always collaborating with them. If we need something that they know more about, then obviously you go and talk to those people that know more about, because we can't as individuals know everything. We can't as companies know everything. So it's all about collaboration and moving forward and learning to work with each other, learning to talk to each other, learning to trust. That is a big thing.
Well, I think that's a great sentiment to end this morning panel. Thank you, Early Bird panel, for kicking us off, starting us for the day, getting our creative juices flowing. Let's give our panel a big round of applause.